Agatha Raisin and the Vicar's Confession in Carsely. A peaceful Cotswold Sunday shatters when a vicar's sermon hints at hidden sin, and Agatha Raisin knows that where confession lurks, murder is never far behind. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Carsely looked deceptively peaceful that Sunday morning, the kind of spring day that made one almost forget that English weather was an unreliable friend. The sun made a brief appearance over the Honeystone cottages before retreating behind a sullen drift of cloud. Daffodils bowed along the church path as if weary of hope. From her pew, halfway down the aisle, Agatha Raisin squinted toward the pulpit, wondering whether God had ever intended sermons to last this long. The Reverend Alf Bloxby, gentle as milk pudding, was usually soothing to the point of drowsiness. But today something in his voice had a strange edge. His thin face was pink, his hands gripping the lectern as though holding on to decency itself. "We must speak truth," he declared, startling the congregation into wakefulness. "Even when that truth shames us, a sin concealed corrodes the soul." Mrs. Mason's hymn book slipped to the floor with a papery slap. Agatha leaned forward, intrigued. Nothing enlivened a Sunday like the hint of scandal. She darted a glance at Mrs. Bloxby, who sat serenely in the front row, eyes on her husband. Even she looked a little tense, her fingers twisting her wedding ring. The sermon ended abruptly, leaving the village buzzing like bees disturbed in their hive. Outside, drizzle returned in half-hearted droplets. Parishioners clustered on the green, dissecting the service. "Sounded to me as if he'd a guilty conscience," whispered Doris Simpson. "Rubbish," said Mrs. Mason, recovering her superiority. "He was talking about modern society, not himself." "He said, 'confession,'" Doris insisted, "plain as day." Agatha lingered, pretending to admire the tulip bed. The truth was she couldn't resist gossip any more than she could resist lighting a cigarette after Vespers. Unfortunately, the vicarage garden discouraged smoking, too near the vicar's azaleas, so she settled for curiosity. Mrs. Bloxby appeared at her side, smiling her tranquil smile. "Do come in for tea, Mrs. Raisin. Alf would be glad of company after such an exhausting morning." Agatha hesitated. She was fond of Mrs. Bloxby, but wary of clergy conversation. They tended to slide towards self-improvement. Still, she followed her through the vicarage gate, reasoning that a bit of moral uplift wouldn't kill her, though she wasn't entirely sure. The garden smelled of damp grass and the vicar's aftershave. A tray of tepid tea waited on the wrought-iron table. Alf Bloxby sat hunched beside it, still wearing his clerical collar, as if afraid to remove his armour. He looked up at Agatha with mild desperation. "Mrs. Raisin," he began, "I fear I must speak to the police." Agatha almost dropped her cup. "Good heavens, whatever for?" Mrs. Bloxby's calm voice intervened. "Alf has been troubled about parish matters, that's all. I'm sure it's nothing serious." But Alf shook his head, eyes fixed on the primroses. "There are things I ought to have said long ago, before it's too late." Agatha's mind raced delightfully. Embezzlement? Secret affair? The possibilities glittered. "If it's a matter of advice, perhaps I might help," she offered, adopting her tone of worldly compassion. "No, no," he said quickly. "You mustn't be involved," which of course guaranteed she would be. They sipped their tea in uneasy silence until Mrs. Bloxby changed the subject to the WI bake sale accounts. Agatha managed to insert her usual complaint, that her quiche had been unfairly undervalued compared with Mrs. Mason's sponges, but her heart wasn't in it. Something in the vicar's expression had unsettled her. When he finally excused himself to prepare for evensong, she caught the faint tremor in his hands. "He's been tired lately," Mrs. Bloxby said softly. "People forget clergy are human." "Yes, but not usually melodramatic," muttered Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby gave a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes a guilty conscience wears a cassock, Mrs. Raisin." That remark lingered long after Agatha left the vicarage. She walked down the lane toward her cottage, Hodge's supper on her conscience. The drizzle had thickened, beading her trench coat and darkening the Honeystone. Villagers still clustered near the church, their heads bent in conspiratorial knots. Carsely, she reflected, was incapable of leaving any mystery alone, even one involving its mildest soul. At home, Hodge greeted her with a yawn of mild reproach. Agatha poured him his dish of salmon and herself a gin. The fire smouldered low, the room smelled of cat and lavender polish. She lit a cigarette, balancing it on the rim of the ashtray like a punctuation mark to thought. "Before it's too late," she repeated aloud. What on earth could that mean? Perhaps the vicar had discovered a theft in the collection plate, or an affair among the bell ringers, though, she mused, most of them were past the age of sinning effectively. The telephone rang, making her jump. It was Roy Silver, his voice bright as tinfoil. "Darling Aggie, how's rural virtue?" "About to collapse under its own weight," she said. "Excellent. I'll pop down tomorrow. Need fresh air and scandal. You supply both." She smiled despite herself. Roy's visits usually left chaos in their wake, but provided invaluable distraction. After he rang off, she glanced at the church through her window. The spire rose like a warning finger against the fading light. Something unpleasant had stirred beneath Carsely's tidy surface. She could feel it. Later, in bed, she tried reading, but found her thoughts circling back to the sermon. Alf Bloxby, kind, colourless Alf, had looked like a man with the world closing in. What if he were hiding something serious? She dismissed it as imagination, then reconsidered. Agatha's imagination, unfortunately, had an impeccable record of accuracy when mischief was afoot. Monday morning arrived grey and damp, as if the weather had taken lessons in understatement. Hodge insisted on breakfast at 6. Agatha shuffled to the kitchen, muttering at his superior attitude. While the kettle boiled, she glanced out at the churchyard. The mist drifted low between the stones, giving the place a ghostly air. She told herself sternly that vicars were not usually murderers, but the thought had already taken root. By 9 o'clock she was dressed, lipsticked, and halfway to the green. She told herself she was only going to the shop for milk, but her route happened to pass the vicarage gate. Mrs. Bloxby's curtains were open, yet no sign of Alf. The gate creaked faintly as she paused, peering toward the church notice board. The week's services were neatly typed as always, but her eye caught a new line added in ballpoint. "Confession by appointment." Agatha stared at it, the drizzle speckling her hair. The words looked almost accusatory. Confession of what? And to whom? She straightened, her pulse quickening with that old secret thrill, the one that always came before trouble. Carsely might imagine itself safe beneath its thatched roofs, but she knew better. Every quiet village hid a story waiting to crawl out of respectability. Agatha flicked her damp cigarette into the gutter and smiled grimly. "If there's a confession to be had," she murmured, "I'll hear it first." Behind her, the church bell began to toll, slow and hollow, echoing through the mist like the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. By Tuesday morning, Carsely's piece had unravelled like a cheap cardigan. The previous day's sermon had been properly digested, seasoned overnight, and reheated as village gossip. Clouds hung low over the green, pressing down on the Honeystone cottages as though even the sky disapproved of speculation. Agatha Raisin, peering out of her cottage window with a cigarette balanced on her lip, could practically feel the rumours brewing across hedgerows. The doorbell rang just as she was considering her second coffee. Doris Simpson bustled in without waiting for an invitation. Carsely etiquette allowed for intrusion if one carried gossip. "You'll never believe it, Mrs. Raisin," Doris began, eyes shining with the excitement of sin committed at a safe distance. "Our vicar, down at the police station in Mercester. An hour he was there. An hour!" Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Oh, come now. Probably blessing the cells." "Ha! Don't you believe it. My cousin's friend's nephew works near the station. Said he saw Mr. Bloxby go in, looking pale as milk and not come out till gone 11. Agatha tried to look uninterested, though her pulse had quickened. "Did he now?" she murmured, as though it were nothing to her. "And another thing," Doris went on, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. "Mrs. Mason says there's trouble in the accounts, missing money from the flower fund or some such. Well, I've always said those lilies were too extravagant." Agatha's curiosity, always a muscle too easily exercised, flexed hard. But she only said, "I'm sure it's nothing so dull as that, Doris. The vicar probably reported a stolen hymn book." "If you say so," Doris replied, unconvinced. "Still, it's not right. A man of God going to the police." She gathered her shopping bag with a sigh of deep righteousness and departed, leaving a wake of speculation more potent than perfume. Agatha stood at the window watching her go, cigarette smoke curling about her head like thought made visible. She felt an absurd pang of protectiveness toward the vicar. If Alf Bloxby had been in trouble, surely Mrs. Bloxby would have said something yesterday. Then again, Mrs. Blocksby had a face that could conceal an earthquake behind a polite smile. By mid-afternoon, the gossip had migrated to its natural habitat, the Women's Institute Hall. Agatha had only meant to drop by for the meeting on creative composting, but she might as well have walked into Parliament during a scandal. "They say it's a woman," hissed Mrs. Mason as Agatha entered. "Don't be ridiculous," said another. "It's theft. Everyone knows churchmen are always stealing something. Time, money, or souls." Agatha's ears pricked up like a cat hearing a can opener. A woman? A theft? Deliciously scandalous. She could have stayed silent, but her vanity got the better of her. She cleared her throat with the authority of someone accustomed to holding attention. "Well," she said, "he confided in me first." It was meant as a harmless flourish, a little spark to warm her dull Monday. The reaction, however, was volcanic. Mrs. Mason gasped. Doris leaned forward, eyes wide as tea saucers. "He told you," Agatha faltered. "Oh, not in so many words." "What did he confess?" another demanded. "Nothing," said Agatha sharply, regretting every syllable. But it was too late. The words had escaped like hens from an unlatched coop. Within minutes, the story had mutated into several versions, each less flattering than the last. In one, the vicar was under investigation for fraud. In another, Agatha was helping him conceal a love affair. By the time the meeting broke up, Carsely's moral compass was spinning like a weather vane in a storm. Agatha fled, cheeks burning. Vanity, she told herself, was her worst vice, and also the only one that made life interesting. That evening, as she refilled Hodge's bowl and poured herself a gin, the telephone rang. She picked up warily. "Agatha, it's Bill Wong," the voice of reason itself. Agatha grimaced. "Oh, hello, Bill. To what do I owe this intrusion?" "I'm just checking in," he said mildly. "There's talk that you know something about the vicar's visit to the police. Care to enlighten me? Off the record?" Agatha rolled her eyes at the ceiling. "I wish people would mind their own business." "They would, if you didn't tell them otherwise," Bill said, amusement creeping into his tone. She hesitated, then decided half a truth was safer than silence. "He did seem a bit overwrought yesterday. Said he might speak to the police about, well, something or other. Probably parish nonsense. You know how earnest men of the cloth can be." Bill sounded unconvinced. "Try not to stir the pot, Agatha. You've enough enemies without adding the clergy." "I never stir, dear boy. I simply observe." "Right," said Bill dryly, "and the kettle simply boils itself." After he rang off, Agatha stood for a moment, staring at her reflection in the dark window. The face that looked back at her was still attractive, she thought defensively, though the lines around her eyes had become familiar lodgers. Perhaps she meddled because it distracted her from time's little cruelties. She lit another cigarette, inhaling the comfort of smoke and purpose. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Mrs. Blocksby, carrying a plate covered with a tea towel. "I thought you might like a bit of shepherd's pie," she said kindly. Agatha's tone softened. "You spoil me. Come in, won't you?" Mrs. Blocksby declined with her usual gentle firmness. "No, I can't stay. I just wanted to say, don't worry about Alf. People will talk. Let them." Agatha leaned on the doorframe, studying her. "He was at the police station, though." Mrs. Blocksby's eyes flickered, only for an instant. "He was helping with a small matter. Nothing for you to concern yourself with." Agatha smiled sweetly, which was always her most dangerous expression. "You know me, Mrs. Blocksby. I'm not one to pry." "Of course not," said the vicar's wife, smiling serenely. Then she added, with quiet emphasis, "Sometimes it's kinder to let the matter rest." When the door closed, Agatha stood in silence, the words hanging like a curtain between them. "Let the matter rest" was the one phrase guaranteed to have the opposite effect on her. She carried the shepherd's pie to the table and uncovered it. Hodge jumped onto a chair, hopeful. "Don't even think about it," Agatha told him, then relented and shared a corner of crust. "Well," she said to the cat, "if everyone else is whispering, I might as well know the truth firsthand." She switched off the kitchen light and went to the window. The green was quiet now, only the pub lights glowing through the mist. Somewhere a fox barked. Carsely slept, but its gossip did not. She tapped ash into the sink and smiled crookedly. "Let the matter rest," she murmured. "Not likely." Hodge yawned, unimpressed. Agatha reached for another cigarette. When she struck the match, the flare of light caught her reflection again, eyes bright, expression wickedly alive. For the first time in weeks, she felt the pulse of excitement that always came before trouble. "He confided in me first," she repeated under her breath, half in guilt, half in pride. The church bell tolled 9. Outside, the mist thickened, and Agatha Raisin, Carsely's self-appointed detective, took a long drag and exhaled toward the ceiling, her smoke curling like a promise. By Wednesday morning, the day began with protest. Hodges, to be precise. He sat on Agatha Raisin's bedside table, tail swishing like a metronome of discontent, yowling at the injustice of a late breakfast. The clock read 6:30. The world outside was a misty grey, the kind that made even the Cotswolds look as though God had misplaced his spectacles. "All right, you ungrateful beast," Agatha muttered, throwing back the duvet. "I'm coming." In the kitchen, she set down his food and reached for the kettle, lighting her first cigarette of the day while it boiled. Through the lace curtain, she saw fog rolling across Carsely's Green, wrapping the cottages in ghostly cotton. Sunday's gossip still simmered in her mind, and she wondered if Alf Bloxby was already regretting his mysterious confession. Then she noticed movement by the churchyard gate, police tape fluttering faintly in the mist. 2 figures moved among the yews. Even at a distance, their stance was unmistakable. Professionals doing something unpleasant. "Good Lord," she murmured. She stubbed out her cigarette, grabbed her coat, and slipped outside. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, metallic, heavy, wrong. The drizzle soaked through her fringe as she crossed the lane. A constable stopped her at the lich gate, politely but firmly. "Sorry, ma'am, no entry." "What's happened?" she demanded. "Police matter." "Everything's a police matter if you're in uniform," she retorted, trying to peer past him. He shifted awkwardly. "It's Mr. Pike, the verger. I'm afraid he's passed on." Agatha blinked. Harold Pike? That timid little man who arranged the hymn numbers and blushed if someone looked at him too long. She caught a glimpse through the fog, a tarp beside the compost heap and the unmistakable outline beneath. "How?" she asked quietly. "Too early to say," the constable replied. Too early for him, perhaps, but not for Agatha's imagination, which was already staging its own melodrama. By mid-morning, Carsely's tranquillity had been replaced by the buzzing of police radios and the thrum of speculation. Mrs. Mason appeared on the green in her dressing gown, proclaiming that the village was under siege. Doris Simpson arrived soon after, clutching a rain-bonnet and rumours. "Found him by the compost heap, poor soul," Doris said, eyes alight. "They say he fell and hit his head." "And you know this because," Agatha asked, "because my niece's husband's brother saw the ambulance," Agatha snorted. "That's one step removed from divine revelation." She turned toward the vicarage. Alf Bloxby stood at the gate, pale and stricken, Mrs. Bloxby beside him with her hand on his arm. The sight tugged unexpectedly at Agatha. Whatever his secrets, the vicar looked like a man crushed beneath invisible weight. Bill Wong arrived then, his trench coat darkened by drizzle. He greeted Agatha with a nod that mixed fondness and caution. "Morning, Agatha. I might have known you'd be first on scene." "I live here," she said defensively. "Hardly my fault corpses turn up in my parish. Still, I'd appreciate it if you didn't trample the evidence." Agatha folded her arms. "Do I look like a trampler?" "Yes," said Bill, then softened the blow with a smile. They stepped aside under the yew branches, mist thick around them. "Was it murder?" she asked. "Suspicious circumstances," he said, which was police speak for probably yes. "And the vicar?" Bill hesitated. "He was one of the last to see Pike alive. They had words earlier that evening, apparently." Agatha's eyebrows rose. "Words? Alf Bloxby doesn't have words. He has homilies." "Harold Pike handled the parish accounts," Bill continued. "Seems there was a disagreement." Agatha felt a small thrill, horror mixed with fascination. A church dispute, embezzlement, jealousy? She wanted to ask more, but Bill's expression warned her off. "Keep your nose out of this one, Aggie," he said kindly. "I mean it." "Of course," she lied. By lunchtime, the news had spread beyond Carsely. A Mercester radio van parked near the pub, and the Red Lion filled with villagers seeking pints and theories. Agatha, soaked and irritable, pushed through the door, greeted by the smell of chips and speculation. "Terrible business," someone said. "They say he was blackmailing the vicar." "Nonsense," replied another. "It was an accident. Those compost heaps are treacherous." My cousin swears she saw a woman running from the churchyard, Doris declared. Agatha ordered a gin and tonic, listening with growing irritation. Everyone was suddenly an expert. She told herself she'd come to gather facts, but she knew better. It was vanity. She wanted to be the first to understand, the first to solve what everyone else only whispered about. Her opportunity arrived, of course, by telephone. Back home, the answering machine blinked red. Roy Silver's voice burst forth like confetti. "Aggie, darling, tragedy in your village and you at the centre. How delicious! The papers are all over it. Call me. We'll get you quoted nationally. Local sleuth comforts Vicar amidst scandal. I can see it now." "You'll see nothing," she muttered, erasing the message. Yet she couldn't help a guilty flicker of interest. Hodge yawned from the windowsill as if judging her. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "It's not vanity, it's public service." A knock at the door interrupted her defence. Mrs. Bloxby stood there, her raincoat damp, her face pale but composed. "May I come in, Mrs. Raisin?" Agatha ushered her to the armchair, poured tea, and tried to look comforting. "Terrible business," she began. Mrs. Bloxby nodded. "Harold was troubled lately. Alf tried to help him." She paused, hands folded. "You mustn't listen to the talk, Agatha. Alf would never harm anyone." "Of course not," said Agatha quickly. "Still, people can be foolish. He did say something about going to the police, didn't he?" Mrs. Bloxby's eyes lifted sharply. "He did. But that was about conscience, not crime." "Meaning?" "Meaning you must trust him, even if others don't." There was a quiet authority in her tone that silenced Agatha. Still, as soon as the vicar's wife departed, she reached for the phone. "Bill, it's me. I've been thinking—" "Don't," said Bill's weary voice. "Just this once, leave it alone." "Oh, don't be so pompous," she snapped. "I only wondered if you'd ruled out accident." "Agatha," he said, "the vicar was seen walking with Harold last night. No one else. That's all I can tell you." He rang off before she could protest. The drizzle thickened into rain. Agatha stood at her window, watching the churchyard fade into the mist. The yews stood solemn and dark, guarding their secrets. Somewhere under that tarp lay a man whose death had cracked Carsely's serene little bubble. She lit another cigarette, drawing in the smoke like courage. The match flared, reflecting briefly in her eyes. "If the Lord won't clear Alf Bloxby," she murmured, "I shall." Hodge stretched, unimpressed by divine ambition. Agatha poured herself a gin, the ice clinking like punctuation on her decision. Outside, the rain eased to a fine whisper, and the police lights flickered once before disappearing into the fog. The village, obediently pretending to sleep, had no idea that Agatha Raisin, armed with lipstick, suspicion, and entirely too much curiosity, was already plotting her next move. The rain had returned in earnest by Thursday morning, smudging the Cotswold hills into watercolour greys. Carsely looked half washed away, its lanes slick with mud and gossip. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, cigarette in one hand, telephone receiver in the other, glaring at it as if sheer will might force it to ring. It didn't. Hodge leapt onto the table and began an unhurried wash, tail flicking disdainfully near her toast. "You'd think the man would have the decency to call," Agatha muttered. Hodge blinked. The man in question was, of course, Detective Sergeant Bill Wong, who had so far resisted every one of her inquiries about Harold Pike's death. She snatched up the receiver and dialed the Mercester police station. "Wong, please. Tell him it's Agatha Raisin. Yes, that Agatha Raisin." When Bill's voice finally came on the line, it sounded as if he'd aged a decade overnight. "Good morning, Agatha. To what do I owe this early pleasure?" "Don't be flippant," she snapped. "I'm worried about poor Harold. You could at least tell me if the vicar's cleared." "He's not a suspect," said Bill carefully. "Then why the long face?" "Because every time I speak to you, I end up filing 3 extra reports," he said. "Bill," she said sweetly, which was never a good sign, "you know I have a nose for detail. You could save yourself work if you just— oh, I don't know, let me look at those church accounts." There was a silence. Then Bill sighed, the sigh of a man who had fought this battle before and lost every round. "How do you even know there are church accounts involved?" "I live in Carsely. Of course I know. Nothing happens here without a ledger attached." "Agatha, don't Agatha me. Bring them by. I'll have lunch ready." "You don't cook." "I'll buy something," she retorted. Half an hour later, he was on her doorstep with a raincoat dripping onto her mat and an expression of long, suffering patience. "Agatha, already dressed for detective work in her best navy suit and heels unsuitable for mud, ushered him in. "Sit down. Tea? Gin? Both?" "Tea, thank you. And before you start interrogating me—" "Who said anything about interrogation?" she interrupted innocently. "Now, tell me about the money." Bill rubbed a hand over his face. "There's nothing concrete yet. The accounts show a few odd withdrawals, small sums over several months. Altogether about £2,000, all under the flower fund." £2,000 on flowers, Agatha repeated. They'd have had to carpet the church in roses. "Exactly what we're checking. Harold Pike was the only one with access to the petty cash box and the deposit records." Agatha leaned forward. "So he was stealing, and the vicar found out. Motive, plain as day." "Or," Bill countered, "someone wanted it to look that way. Leave it, Agatha, please." "You know me better than that." "I was afraid you'd say that." When he left, she stared at the rain outside, smoke curling from her cigarette like thought-given form. She didn't trust coincidences or polite warnings. At 1:30, she rang Charles Fraith. "Darling, to what do I owe the summons?" came his languid drawl. "I need your help." "My dear, that's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. Don't start. You know people. Church people. I need access to the diocesan accounts." "You make it sound thrillingly illegal," he said, intrigued. "Very well, I'll put on my tie of moral respectability." By 3:00, they were in his battered blue convertible, roof up against the drizzle, on their way to the diocesan offices in Mercester. Charles looked infuriatingly elegant in tweed, while Agatha clutched her handbag like a weapon. "You're certain you can charm the treasurer?" she asked. "I can charm anyone over 50, he said modestly. "They respond to breeding, and I shall mention a donation." It worked. Within 15 minutes they were seated in a gloomy office filled with the smell of old carpet and older sanctity. The diocesan treasurer, a portly man with the complexion of boiled ham, positively beamed at Charles. "Always a pleasure to see the Fraith family supporting the parish," he said. "Delighted," Charles replied smoothly. "My friend Mrs. Raisin is helping me understand where our humble contributions go." Agatha smiled tightly. "Yes, I do like to know where my money's wasted." An hour later they emerged triumphant into the rain. Agatha clutched a photocopy of the ledger. "Flower Fund," she read aloud. "Withdrawn in cash, small amounts over months, signed by Pike, approved by Alf Bloxby. Oh, the poor man. He'll be crucified by gossip." "Assuming he isn't guilty," Charles said mildly. She glared. "You don't think he killed Harold?" "No, but people rarely die over petunias. My money's on blackmail." "Blackmail?" Someone was paying to keep something quiet. Perhaps Pike wasn't stealing for himself. Agatha stopped short under the dripping eaves. "Bill didn't say anything about blackmail." "Bill never says anything he doesn't want printed on a caution form," said Charles. Back at her cottage, Agatha hung up her coat, feeling that delicious pulse of curiosity return. Charles, perfectly at home, poured 2 glasses of wine and settled on her sofa. "So," he said, "what's next, detective?" "We confront Mrs. Bloxby, of course. She knows something." "You can't interrogate the vicar's wife." "Watch me." She stood at once, but paused at the sight of her own reflection in the mirror, flushed, eager, ridiculous. "I look like a bloodhound in lipstick," she muttered. "A glamorous bloodhound," Charles offered. The visit, however, did not go as planned. Mrs. Bloxby met them at the vicarage door with her usual serenity and a plate of shortbread. "How lovely to see you both. Do come in. Though, if it's parish business, I must warn you, Alf's resting." Agatha accepted tea and tried to sound casual. "Such a pity about Harold Pike. You must be terribly shocked." "Yes," said Mrs. Bloxby softly. "He was a complicated man. Not wicked, just weak. He wanted to be liked, and that led him astray." "You mean the money?" Agatha pressed. Mrs. Bloxby's eyes flickered, then settled on Agatha with a look both kind and sharp. "You mustn't assume that every sin leaves a tidy paper trail." Charles coughed delicately into his cup. Agatha ignored him. "But if something's wrong, surely it's better to face it." "Truth can harm as much as heal," said Mrs. Bloxby gently, "especially when pride is involved." For a moment, Agatha felt something unpleasantly close to guilt. She changed the subject to biscuits. When they left, Mrs. Bloxby saw them to the door, her expression unreadable. In the car, Charles said, "That was impressive. She didn't even raise her voice." "She never does," Agatha muttered. "That's what makes her terrifying." They returned to Carsely as dusk settled over the village, the rain thinning to a fine mist. Agatha invited Charles in for a nightcap, but he declined. "I'm hosting dinner at the club. Do try not to get arrested while I'm gone." "Ha ha," she said flatly. Alone again, Agatha changed into her dressing gown and poured herself a gin. Hodge sat on the windowsill, staring into the dark with the same patience as his mistress lacked. She lit a cigarette and exhaled toward the ceiling. The day had left her restless. There was something unsaid in Mrs. Bloxby's manner, something between warning and pity. "Truth can harm as much as heal," she repeated under her breath. "Well, that's as may be, but lies kill." She stubbed out her cigarette just as the sound of paper sliding through her letterbox broke the silence. Hodge's ears twitched. Agatha froze, then crossed the room. On the mat lay an envelope, plain white, the handwriting neat and unfamiliar. It was addressed to the Reverend Alfred Bloxby, but her own address beneath it. No stamp, no postmark. She turned it over. Sealed. "Well, Hodge," she whispered, "we're in it now." The cat yawned, unimpressed. Agatha placed the envelope on the table beside her untouched gin, the clock ticking like a countdown in the quiet cottage. Outside, Carsely slept, though, as always, its secrets didn't. Friday morning, Carsely wore its drizzle like a veil, soft but insistent, the kind of rain that looked romantic from a window and miserable anywhere else. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, staring at the plain white envelope she had found on her doormat the night before. It lay where she had left it, unopened, beside the half-empty gin glass and Hodge's indignant stare. She'd dreamt about it. Ridiculous, really. An anonymous letter shouldn't have such power over a sensible woman. Yet the address still pricked at her. The Reverend Alfred Bloxby, care of Mrs. A. Raisin, Carsely. Whoever had delivered it knew exactly how to get her attention. She fetched her glasses, slit the envelope neatly, and unfolded the single sheet inside. The type was old-fashioned, slightly uneven, as though from a clattering typewriter rather than a printer. The sin confessed cannot stay buried. Justice sleeps, but not forever. Agatha blinked. Good grief. What is this, a sermon or a threat? She turned it over, looking for a signature. Nothing. Hodge mewed pointedly, unimpressed by melodrama. "Don't start, you cynical brute," she said. "It's obviously connected to poor Harold Pike, or the vicar, or both." Her conscience murmured that she ought to ring Bill Wong immediately. Her pride, however, noted that she had received the letter. Her name, her involvement, her discovery. It would be positively rude not to investigate first. The doorbell rang before guilt could win. She opened it to a gust of perfume and leopard print. "Aggie!" cried Roy Silver, sweeping in like a one-man carnival. "You look divine. Tragic but divine. I came as soon as I heard about the corpse and the clergy. Is it true the village is swarming with police and Puritans?" "Not at the same time," said Agatha. "Take your coat off before you drown in it." He flopped onto her sofa, crossing elegant ankles. "I've missed this place. The air smells of scandal and sheep. Now tell me everything." Agatha hesitated, then, with a sigh, held out the letter. "It came last night, addressed to the vicar but delivered here. And before you say it, no, I didn't type it myself." Roy read aloud with theatrical relish. "The sin confessed cannot stay buried." Oh, delicious. Who writes like this anymore? You've got your own fan mail from the netherworld. "It's not funny, Roy." "Darling, everything's funny until it's over. Now, we must do this properly. Press release, dramatic photo, you looking soulful beside a rain-streaked window." "You're not helping," Agatha snapped. "I ought to show it to Bill." "Ought to, yes," said Roy airily. "But if you do, he'll just take it, mutter something official, and you'll be out of the loop. Come on, let's think like detectives, or at least like journalists." "You're a publicist, not a journalist." "Semantics," he grinned. "Let's go to Mercester. There's a new cafe, bright young things, terrible coffee, and excellent eavesdropping." Agatha gave in, as she usually did where Roy was concerned. Within an hour they were seated at a window table, surrounded by the clink of mismatched crockery and the faint whine of bad jazz. Roy was in his element, fluttering lashes at the waitress, while Agatha, less impressed, stared into her cappuccino and wondered why foam felt so indecently cheerful when one was investigating a death. 2 middle-aged women at the next table caught her ear. Their voices had that stage whisper volume particular to gossipers who want to be overheard. "Terrible business, poor Harold," said one. "I saw him only the day before, by the church gate, arguing with a woman." "A woman?" said the other. "Who?" "Didn't recognize her. Tallish, beige coat, one of those dreadful practical handbags. Could have been anyone." Agatha's pulse quickened. Beige coat, practical handbag that could describe half of Carsely, including, she realized uneasily, Mrs. Bloxby. Roy was watching her with amusement. "You're vibrating, darling. Spill." She recounted the snippet, lowering her voice. What if it was Mrs. Bloxby he was arguing with? "She's been odd lately, nervous." "Oh, Aggie," said Roy, delighted. "You can't accuse the vicar's wife of murder. She's practically the village saint." "Which makes it all the more suspicious," Agatha muttered. Roy leaned back, sipping his coffee. "You're impossible. But if you're right, imagine the headlines. 'Local sleuth unmasks pious killer.' I could get you a whole feature in Woman's Realm." "You'll get us banned from the parish hall," she said, "and wipe that grin off your face." Outside, rain streaked the cafe window like tears on glass. Agatha felt the familiar mix of thrill and discomfort that came with real suspicion. She didn't want to think ill of Mrs. Bloxby, yet the woman had clearly been keeping secrets. And Alf Bloxby, where did he fit in? They returned to Carsely by mid-afternoon. The drizzle had lifted slightly, revealing a washed-out sun. Roy insisted on walking her to her door, for atmosphere, as he put it. "You'll call Bill, won't you?" he said, eyes bright with mischief. "Eventually," said Agatha, "once I know what I'm handing him." "That's my girl." He kissed her cheek, leaving a faint shimmer of cologne. "Keep your powder dry and your lipstick brighter." After he left, the cottage felt too quiet. Agatha poured herself another gin, Hodge jumping onto the armchair with a disapproving thump. "Don't start," she said. "At least I'm doing something." She fetched the letter again, studying the words under the lamp. The typewriter font, the slight smudge on the N of confessed, the deliberate neatness. It wasn't the work of a crank. Someone wanted to provoke guilt, or fear. Her thoughts turned unwillingly to Mrs. Bloxby. Could the kind, patient vicar's wife be involved in something dark? Agatha tried to imagine her typing such a thing. Spectacles perched on nose, expression serene. The image was absurd, and yet... She lit another cigarette, watching smoke curl toward the ceiling. At 8:30, the phone rang. She snatched it up, expecting Roy again. "Agatha Raisin," she said briskly. The voice on the other end was quiet, female, trembling. "Mrs. Raisin? Oh, forgive me, it's Mrs. Bloxby." Agatha straightened. "My dear, are you all right? Have you seen Alf today?" "No. Should I have?" A pause, then. "He went for a walk after supper, as he told me he would. He said he needed air, but he promised to return by nightfall. He hasn't come back." Agatha's heart gave an odd lurch. "Have you called the police?" No, not yet. I don't want to overreact. Perhaps he's at the church. Could you check discreetly?" "Of course," said Agatha, already grabbing her coat. The night air was sharp, the mist thickening again around the green. The churchyard loomed dark, its yew trees black silhouettes. Agatha pushed open the gate, her heels crunching gravel. "Reverend?" she called softly. "Alf?" No answer. The church door stood slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. Inside, the faint smell of candle wax and damp stone clung to the air. She switched on the porch light, its glow falling across empty pews and the pulpit where, only days ago, the vicar had thundered about confession. The stillness unnerved her. She called again, louder this time. Only the echo answered. Back outside, she scanned the lane. The vicarage windows were dark. Mrs. Bloxby's figure moved anxiously behind the curtains. Agatha turned toward her own cottage, pulse quickened by fear and excitement in equal measure. She reached the gate just as Hodge appeared in the window, tail flicking, unimpressed by her midnight heroism. Inside, she locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. The letter still lay on the table where she'd left it, its words faintly gleaming under the lamp. "The sin confessed cannot stay buried." She looked toward the church again through the wet glass. The mist had swallowed the path entirely. "Well," she murmured to Hodge, lighting another cigarette with shaking fingers. "Either the Lord's testing our patience, or Carsely's hiding more than a corpse this time." The cat blinked, then curled up, tail to nose. Agatha poured herself one last gin, the match flame flickering like uneasy faith. Outside, somewhere beyond the fog, the church bell gave a single hollow note. Then silence. By Friday morning, the morning after Alf Bloxby's disappearance, the day arrived pale and wind-blown, the Cotswolds dressed in a damp, uneasy mist. Carsely, normally content with its routine of milk deliveries and mild scandal, was in uproar. Someone claimed to have seen the vicar's bicycle abandoned by the towpath near the Mercester Canal. Within hours, the village was divided evenly between those who thought it a tragic suicide and those who found it unchristianly convenient. Agatha Raisin, wrapped in her trench coat and irritation, stood outside the vicarage watching the police comb the hedgerows. She'd been there since dawn, smoking like a factory chimney. Bill Wong approached, his expression professionally blank. "You should go home, Agatha," he said quietly. "Don't patronize me," she snapped. "You think I'm just hanging about for gossip." "I think you're worried," he said gently. "So am I, but we have to wait." Mrs. Bloxby emerged then, pale but calm, carrying a tray of tea for the officers. Her composure was so steady it almost seemed defiant. Agatha, who distrusted serenity on principle, found it unnerving. "He's not gone for good," Agatha declared. "He's too decent for melodrama." Mrs. Bloxby met her eyes. "I believe you're right, but sometimes the most decent souls despair quietly." It was precisely the sort of saintly remark that made Agatha feel both guilty and combative. She stubbed out her cigarette with unnecessary force. By mid-afternoon, the search had turned up nothing. No footprints, no note, no vicar. Only the bicycle lying forlorn by the canal, its front wheel bent as if struck in haste. Agatha's instincts itched. She knew stage drama when she saw it. She returned home, Hodge following her in moral silence. The cat jumped onto the windowsill and stared, unimpressed, at the rain. Agatha poured herself a gin. "If the police want to believe he's drowned, they can," she muttered. "But he's not that sort. There's something else." A knock interrupted her theorizing. Charles Fraith leaned against the doorframe, immaculate despite the drizzle. "Heard about your missing parson," he said. "Thought you might need an accomplice." "You mean chauffeur," said Agatha, handing him a towel. "Same thing, different class." They sat by the fire, and Agatha showed him what she'd learned. "Bill told me Harold Pike's coat had a pawn ticket in the pocket, Evesham branch, and this hotel receipt, dated the night before he died. He was meeting someone there, probably his blackmailer." Charles's eyebrows rose. "You've been snooping again." "Researching," she corrected. "You can't call it snooping when it's for the greater good. And I suppose you plan to visit this hotel?" "We," she said firmly, "plan to visit it." 2 hours later, Charles's convertible wheezed along the road to Evesham, rain spitting against the windscreen. Agatha clutched the pawn ticket in her gloved hand, pretending she wasn't nervous. The countryside slid past in dripping shades of green. "What exactly is our cover story?" Charles asked. "Simple. We're auditors for the Church Restoration Fund. We're checking charitable accounts." "So, lying then." "It's called investigative improvisation," she said. The hotel was one of those mid-range establishments designed to look charming and fail. The carpet smelled of detergent and defeat. At reception stood a young man in a waistcoat, several sizes too small, his smile bright with suspicion. "Good afternoon," Agatha began in her best vicarage voice. "We're making inquiries on behalf of St. James's Church, Carsely. There was a Mr. Harold Pike who stayed here last week." "Oh," said the clerk, consulting his ledger. "Yes, one night, paid cash. Had a lady visitor, I believe." Agatha exchanged a look with Charles. "A lady visitor?" "Didn't sign in, of course," the clerk added, "but I remember her name. Left a note at the desk. Faith Calder." "Faith," Agatha repeated. "You couldn't make it up." Charles coughed discreetly, clearly enjoying himself. "Would you describe her?" "Mid-30s, dark hair, very smart. Religious jewellery stall at the Evesham market, if I'm not mistaken. Sells crosses and things. Bit intense." Agatha thanked him and turned away, triumphant. "There you are," she whispered. "Our mysterious Faith Calder." Charles followed her out, grinning. "You realize you're almost frightening when you're pleased with yourself." "Nonsense, I'm charming." "You're terrifying." They found Faith's stall in the market square the next morning. It glinted with polished brass crucifixes and cheap saints. The woman behind it fitted the clerk's description, sharp-featured, attractive in a brittle way, eyes as watchful as a hawk's. "Lovely day," Agatha began, though it wasn't. "You must be Miss Calder." "Mrs.," said Faith shortly. "Widowed. Can I help you?" "We're, church auditors," Agatha said piously. "We're reviewing donations to parish charities. You are acquainted with Mr. Harold Pike." Faith's expression tightened. "I don't talk about him. The police already came. I've said all I know." "We're not police," said Agatha sweetly. "We're simply ensuring his contributions were properly recorded. For transparency, you understand." Faith hesitated, then sighed. "He was lonely. Wanted someone to talk to. He gave me a bit of money now and then for my business. I told him to stop, but he wouldn't. Said he needed forgiveness more than I needed cash." Agatha frowned. "Forgiveness for what?" "He never said," Faith replied. "But it wasn't just guilt, it was fear." Charles, who had been pretending to admire a set of rosary beads, leaned closer. "Fear of who?" "A woman," Faith said quietly. "He was terrified of some woman from Carsely. Kept saying she'd make him pay." Agatha and Charles exchanged a look. In Agatha's mind, the image of Mrs. Bloxby flickered again, then vanished as quickly. No, she told herself. Too absurd. Faith seemed suddenly wary. "I've nothing more to add. Please go." They left, Agatha bristling with questions. As they reached the car, Charles burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" she demanded. "You, pretending to be holy. That church auditor act nearly converted me on the spot." "Don't be ridiculous. I was very convincing." "You quoted Corinthians to a market trader." "I had to make it sound authentic." "You said love thy neighbour," with such menace she nearly dropped a crucifix. Agatha tried not to smile. All part of the plan. By the time they reached Carsely, the rain had stopped and the village was simmering with fresh theories. Doris Simpson accosted them on the green, eyes gleaming. "They've dredged the canal," she announced. "No body, mind you, but they found the vicar's bicycle basket. Fancy that. He's probably run off to join a monastery." "Or been kidnapped by nuns," muttered Agatha. Back home, she kicked off her shoes and collapsed into a chair. Hodge jumped onto her lap, purring like an overworked kettle. She stroked him absently, turning over what Faith had said. A woman from Carsely. Fear. Guilt. Charles poured drinks. "So, what do we think?" "Harold was blackmailed," said Agatha firmly. "He met Faith to pay her off, or to confess something, and someone else found out. The vicar must have known more than he admitted." Charles regarded her over his glass. "And where is our missing clergyman in this thrilling narrative?" "Hiding," she said, "or being hidden." He smiled. "Your faith in human wickedness is inspiring." "Realistic," she corrected. As evening fell, Mrs. Bloxby appeared at her door, face calm as ever, a small parcel in her hand. "I found this among Alf's papers," she said. "It's a copy of the hotel receipt from Evesham, with a handwritten note on the back. Dated the night before Harold died. You should have it." Agatha took it carefully, pretending not to know. "Thank you. You're very brave." Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. "Bravery has little to do with it. Faith does." When she'd gone, Charles raised an eyebrow. "Faith again. She's becoming quite the motif." "Don't be clever," said Agatha. "It doesn't suit you." She placed the receipt beside the anonymous letter on her table. Together they looked like clues in a parlour game, harmless until one remembered that real people were missing. She poured another gin and stared into the fire. For once she felt a prickle of fear beneath her irritation. If Alf Bloxby was truly gone, Mrs. Bloxby's calm was either the strength of a saint or the stillness of someone who knew far too much. Hodge stretched, then curled tighter, unbothered by theology or crime. Agatha reached to scratch his ear. "If only humans were as simple as cats," she said. At that moment, the phone rang. She answered, expecting Bill. Instead, a man's voice, nervous, breathless, spoke down the line. "Mrs. Raisin, tell them not to look for me." "Alf? Reverend Bloxby?" she gasped. But the line went dead. The room fell silent except for the tick of the clock. Outside, the first drops of rain began again, soft and inexorable as doubt. Agatha sat back, cigarette trembling slightly between her fingers. "Well, Hodge," she murmured, "the good Lord's taken to leaving messages on the telephone, and I don't like his tone." Saturday morning, Carsely woke to bright sunshine that did nothing to lift its mood. The gossip about the vicar's disappearance had hardened overnight from shock to relish, and the village green hummed with rumours. Agatha Raisin, however, had no time for gossip that morning. She was halfway through her first cigarette when the telephone shrieked, startling Hodge off the kitchen table. "Aggie," came Roy Silver's delighted voice, "tell me you're sitting down. I've done something fabulous." Agatha exhaled smoke warily. "That's rarely true. What have you meddled in?" "Not meddled, investigated. My London contact at the bank did a little digging. Faith Calder's credit card. Used yesterday in Cheltenham. A flat in Montpellier Street." "You what?" said Agatha. "You traced a suspect through her credit card?" "Well, technically through my friend Darren in accounts receivable. He's frightfully discreet, except when drunk, which he was." Agatha pinched the bridge of her nose. "Roy, if I go to prison because of you, I'll haunt your press releases. Darling, this is destiny. Get your handbag. We're going sleuthing." An hour later, she was in Roy's tiny car, knees practically under her chin as they sped toward Cheltenham. The radio blared some overproduced pop anthem, and Roy sang along cheerfully. Agatha lit another cigarette out the window and thought longingly of Charles's more civilized convertible. Cheltenham's Georgian terraces gleamed in the sun, too bright, too smug. They found the address, a narrow building with a brass entry buzzer and peeling white paint. Roy pressed the bell marked F, Calder, but there was no reply. The front door, however, was ajar. "Roy," Agatha whispered, "this is breaking and entering." "No, darling," he said, pushing it open. "Just entering." The flat smelled faintly of stale perfume and dust. Sunlight slanted through half-drawn curtains onto chaos. Drawers yawned open, papers scattered like snow. A cheap figurine of the Virgin Mary lay shattered on the carpet. "Oh, my word," Roy breathed. "Someone's redecorated with a hammer." Agatha moved cautiously through the small sitting room. On the windowsill sat a cat, sleek, ginger, and unimpressed, watching them with cool disdain. "At least someone survived," she murmured. "He's divine." Roy crouched to stroke it. "What shall we call him?" "We're not naming it. We're trespassing, remember?" She scanned the mess. Among the debris were torn envelopes, photographs, and several sheets of typed paper. She picked one up. It began, "My dearest Faith, I am tormented by my love for you and my duty to God." The signature made her stomach twist. A.B. "Oh no," she whispered. Roy glanced up. "What is it?" "Alf Bloxby, or someone pretending to be him." "The vicar?" Roy's eyes widened. "Well, I didn't think he had it in him. Repressed passion and all that." "Don't be vulgar," Agatha snapped, though her voice lacked conviction. She read further. The phrasing was oddly formal, almost sermon-like. "The body is weak, but the soul seeks light." It sounded more pulpit than pillow talk. Roy peeked over her shoulder. "That doesn't sound like a man in love. It sounds like a pamphlet from the Temperance League." "Exactly," Agatha said slowly. "And look, these lines are straight from his sermons. I'd know them anywhere. Someone copied them." Roy whistled. "So our faith was being wooed or blackmailed by a counterfeit clergyman?" "Possibly, but who and why?" Before she could answer, the door creaked behind them. They spun round, hearts thudding. A floorboard creaked in the corridor, then footsteps quick and purposeful, as if someone had been following the same trail. Bill Wong stood in the doorway, arms folded, face a mixture of fury and weary resignation. "What the devil are you doing here?" he demanded. "Investigating," said Agatha defensively. "Trespassing," Bill corrected, "and contaminating a crime scene." "Oh, honestly, Bill, it's not a crime scene," she said, gesturing at the mess. "It's just a woman with poor housekeeping." Bill pointed to the upended chair and broken lock. "It's a crime scene." He turned to Roy. "And you? Why do I even ask?" "I'm merely a concerned citizen," said Roy with exaggerated innocence. "And her chauffeur." Bill pinched the bridge of his nose. "You two will be the death of me." He walked through the flat, gloved hands examining surfaces. "Faith Calder hasn't been seen since yesterday afternoon. Her neighbours heard shouting, then a car speeding off. No sign of her since." Agatha felt an unpleasant chill. "And her cat?" "We'll find it a home," Bill said. "I'll keep it safe until you sort a foster," Agatha declared. Bill looked at her. "You already have a cat." "This one's evidence," she said firmly. "Fine," he sighed. "But for heaven's sake, Agatha, stay out of it. This woman was mixed up in something dangerous, and if those letters are genuine, you could ruin the Blocksbys. They're not genuine, she said quickly. I can tell. You always can, he said dryly. Agatha folded her arms. What does that mean? That you make up your mind before the facts, and the facts limp after. She bristled. You're impossible, and you're incorrigible. Promise me you won't interfere. I promise, she said solemnly. Bill left with the evidence. The moment his car pulled away, Agatha turned to Roy. We're calling Charles. Roy grinned. I wondered how long that would take. Back in Carsely, Hodge regarded the temporary visitor, the ginger cat, with profound offence. The two glared at each other from opposite ends of the sitting room. Roy poured wine while Agatha paced, the letter open on the table. Look at the phrasing, she said. The sin of temptation must be confessed. It's practically lifted from Alf's sermon on Palm Sunday. Maybe Faith collected Vicars the way some women collect teaspoons, Roy suggested. Don't be flippant. Someone's framing him, or using his name for something rotten. Well, said Roy, sipping his wine, you've got a cat, a mystery lover, and forged love letters. It's practically a television series. If you're the audience, I want a refund, she said. The telephone rang, startling both cats into mutual hissing. Agatha snatched up the receiver. Charles, thank God. You need to come over. Roy's uncovered something. That alone is worrying, came Charles's amused drawl. What have you done now? Never mind that, she said. We found Faith Calder's flat. Ransacked. Letters signed A.B. Bill thinks they're real, but they read like Sunday sermons. Someone's imitating Alf Blocksby. Or Alf's moonlighting as a romantic novelist, Charles said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. True to his word, he arrived 25 minutes later, damp-haired from the drizzle. He took one look at the ginger cat and groaned. Good grief, how many strays are you collecting this month? It's temporary, Agatha said. He's evidence. Of your madness, perhaps. They sat around the table, Agatha's hastily made photocopies and notes spread out like a séance. Charles studied them carefully. You're right, they're artificial. Someone's mimicking piety to sound authentic. See this line, the wages of sin are secrecy. That's not Blocksby, it's theatre. Agatha frowned. Then why the signature? Because whoever wrote them wanted Faith to believe she had power over a man of the cloth. Blackmail needs respectability. A.B. gives it gravitas. Roy's eyes gleamed. So Faith was blackmailing a faker pretending to be the vicar. Delicious. Possibly, Charles said. Or she discovered the impostor and tried to extort him. Either way, it explains the ransacking. Someone wanted those letters back. Agatha nodded slowly. The pieces were beginning to fit, though uneasily. Which means Alf's disappearance might be connected. He must have realized someone was using his name. And perhaps tried to stop them, Charles added. Roy clapped his hands. Oh, it's so much better than reality television. We've got guilt, passion, and forged stationery. I'm ordering popcorn. Order silence instead, Agatha said sharply. She looked out the window at the creeping dusk. If someone's gone to these lengths, Faith may already be dead. For once, Roy was quiet. Hodge stretched on the armchair, watching her with lazy indifference, while the ginger cat settled smugly on Roy's scarf. Charles poured them each a drink. We'll speak to Bill tomorrow, carefully, without admitting your little break-in. He already knows, Agatha muttered. Of course he does, Charles said, smiling faintly. You never could resist confession, could you? Agatha made a face. Don't start quoting scripture. I've had enough religion for one lifetime. When the others had gone, she tidied the table, though her thoughts refused to settle. She read the last line of one letter again. Truth will out, but not from my lips. She lit a cigarette, staring at the smoke curling upward. Truth never does, she said softly. Hodge yawned, unimpressed. The ginger cat purred like a small engine, already at home. Agatha poured herself one last gin and looked toward the vicarage lights across the green, faint and lonely. Someone's playing God in this village, she murmured, and I intend to find out who. Outside, drizzle whispered against the windows, soft and secretive as sin. Carsely Church on a weekday morning was a study in pious neglect. The flagstones smelled faintly of damp hymnals, and the air held that faint tang of candle smoke and resignation particular to English parish life. Agatha Raisin, standing in the choir loft and pretending interest in a row of dusty psalters, thought it all quite dreary. Charles Fraith leaned against the organ with his usual indolent grace, tapping a rhythm that would have scandalized the Women's Institute. "Remind me again," he said, "why we're risking eternal damnation in a vestry." "Because," said Agatha, lowering her voice as footsteps echoed below, "Harold Pike sometimes signed parish correspondence A.V., Assistant Verger. That's our forged signature. He was using Alf's initials to shift money around the church accounts." "You mean embezzlement?" Charles raised an amused brow. "Goodness, Aggie, that's terribly unsecular for a choir boy." Before she could reply, the organist arrived, Mr. Lionel Sims, thin as a metronome, in a cardigan that looked knitted from the ashes of old hymn books. He regarded them with suspicion. "You're not from the diocese," he said. "Oh, but we are," Agatha said sweetly. "Church Restoration Fund auditors, checking on the late Mr. Pike's documentation. Routine, of course." "Oh, well," Lionel preened slightly. "I told them years ago we needed proper oversight. Poor Harold. He did his best, but he wasn't good with figures." Agatha gave him her most disarming smile. "So we've heard. Did he ever mention balancing parish withdrawals or special donations?" Lionel's fingers fluttered nervously over a hymn sheet. "He was always borrowing the vicar's stationery, said it lent weight to correspondence. Terribly improper, but he was terrified of confrontation. And of Mrs. Bloxby." "Of Mrs. Bloxby," Charles repeated, grinning. "How delicious." "Well, you know how she can look at you," said Lionel earnestly. "That calm disapproval. He'd confess to murder just to make it stop." Agatha's curiosity sharpened. "Did he mention anyone named Faith Calder?" Lionel hesitated. "Ah, the woman with the religious trinkets. He used to write to her, I think. I saw a note once on his desk. Bit sentimental for parish business. Yours always, A.B." Agatha felt a jolt. "You're certain it was his handwriting?" "Oh, yes," Lionel said smugly. "I tuned the organ, Mrs. Raisin, and I noticed details. Harold was a fool for drama. I told him once that sin, like flat notes, always tells in the end." "And what did he say?" asked Charles. "He said," Lionel lowered his voice theatrically, "some lies serve the Lord better than truth." Then he laughed. Agatha exchanged a glance with Charles. For a moment the sunlight through the stained glass seemed to flicker darkly. They thanked Lionel and left, Agatha clutching her handbag like a weapon. Outside, drizzle had returned, thin and persistent, as though even the heavens disapproved. "So," said Charles as they crossed the green, "Harold was forging Alf's signature, flirting with faith and preaching morality on Sundays. Splendid hypocrisy. What now?" "Now we tell Bill," Agatha said grimly, "and pray he doesn't arrest me for obstructing justice." "Or impersonating an auditor," Charles added helpfully. They stopped at the Red Lion for lunch. The pub smelled of wet wool and beef pie. Doris Simpson was at the bar, gossiping with a ferocity that suggested divine mission. "Terrible business, Mrs. Raisin," she said as they passed. "First the vicar gone, now that Faith woman missing, and they say Harold's books don't balance. I said to Trevor only this morning, 'You can't trust a man who hums in church.'" Agatha managed a smile. "Quite right, Doris. Keep an eye on anyone who sings soprano, too." She and Charles took a corner table. As they ate, Agatha's mind churned. Harold's fraud explained part of it, but not all. Why the confessions, the fear, the vicar's disappearance? "He was being blackmailed," she murmured. Charles looked up from his pint. "By Faith?" "At first. But someone else found out. Someone clever enough to use Alf's name and Harold's guilt to tie it all together." "You do realize you sound like Miss Marple with a hangover." "Better a hangover than a conscience," she retorted. They were halfway through dessert when Bill Wong arrived, raincoat dripping. He looked tired. "You too," he said. "I might have known. I've just come from Mercester HQ. The pathologists confirmed Harold Pike's death was homicide. Poison. And before you ask, yes, someone replaced his sugar with arsenic." Agatha felt the room tilt slightly. "So it wasn't guilt, it was murder." Bill nodded. "And Alf Bloxby's still missing. If you have anything at all, you'd better tell me now." She told him about the forged signatures and Lionel's confession. Bill listened grimly. "It fits, but it's not enough. Whoever killed Harold may be the same one who silenced Faith Calder." "Faith's dead?" Agatha asked sharply. "Missing," said Bill, "but her car's been found near Mercester Heath, burnt out." For once, Agatha was speechless. Bill glanced at her. "Promise me you'll keep out of this now." "Of course," she said automatically. "You always say that," Bill muttered, and left. Charles sighed. "You're not going to keep out of it, are you?" "Don't be ridiculous," said Agatha. They left the pub as dusk thickened over Carsely. The cottages glowed softly through the mist, domestic and deceptive. Agatha walked Charles to his car. "You know," he said, smiling, "you really ought to have been a priest. You'd be marvellous at extracting confessions." "Only if gin counted as holy water," she said dryly. He laughed, kissed her cheek lightly, and drove off. Agatha watched the taillights vanish into fog, then returned home, feeling that familiar blend of triumph and unease. Inside, Hodge greeted her with a pointed yawn. She poured herself a gin, switched on the lamp, and sank into the armchair. The forged letters lay on the table beside her, sinister even in the soft light. She thought again of Lionel's words. Some lies serve the Lord better than truth. What had Harold meant? And what had Alf feared confessing? The telephone rang, sharp and sudden. She snatched it up. "Agatha?" The voice was soft, hesitant. Mrs. Bloxby. "My dear, where are you?" Agatha demanded. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," said Mrs. Bloxby quietly, "but it wasn't money Harold feared confessing. It was the lie." "What lie?" Agatha pressed. There was a pause, a rustle, perhaps of wind, perhaps of breath, and then the line went dead. Agatha stared at the receiver. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered. "What is it with this village and unfinished sentences?" Hodge stretched luxuriously on the rug, entirely unmoved by spiritual crisis. Agatha refilled her glass and sat back, mind spinning through possibilities. A lie worse than theft, a lie worth killing for. Outside, sirens wailed faintly toward Mercester Heath. Agatha's pulse quickened. She switched off the lamp and peered through the window at the darkening green, where mist curled like smoke. Her reflection looked back, sharp-eyed, tired, but undeniably alive. "All right," she said to Hodge, lighting another cigarette. "If truth's gone missing, we'll just have to dig it up ourselves." The cat blinked once, as if unimpressed by mortal ambition, then closed his eyes again. Agatha exhaled a plume of smoke, dryly amused at her own melodrama. "Honestly," she said aloud, "one decent vicar and half the county falls apart." The clock ticked on, steady and judgmental, as the first report crackled over the radio. A burnt-out car found near Mercester Heath. Body inside. Female. Agatha poured another gin. "Faith," she murmured, "you poor fool. You've made me late for supper." She sat very still for a long moment, listening to the rain begin again on the window, soft and relentless, like the whisper of secrets too long kept. Carsely had woken to a rare, flawless morning, blue sky, birdsong, and the faint scent of lilac, but the villagers greeted it with nervous solemnity. Sunshine, they agreed, was never a good omen when an inquest was scheduled. Agatha Raisin, dressed in her sharpest navy suit and a hat that teetered between fashionable and theatrical, regarded herself in the mirror with a critical eye. "Dignified," she muttered. "Respectable, possibly terrifying." Hodge, curled on the bed, yawned in agreement. The coroner's inquest was being held in the Mercester Town Hall, a squat Victorian building that always smelled faintly of disinfectant and despair. By 10:30, the hall was full, villagers, reporters, and the curious all murmuring like bees around scandal. Agatha found a seat near the front beside Mrs. Bloxby, who looked pale but composed, hands clasped neatly in her lap. Charles sat behind them, offering quiet moral support and occasional eye-rolling. At the front, the coroner adjusted his spectacles. "This inquest concerns the deaths of Mr. Harold Pike and Mrs. Faith Calder, both matters being investigated as potentially connected." A murmur rippled through the room. Agatha braced herself. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the side door opened, and in walked the Reverend Alfred Bloxby. He looked thinner, his face lined with exhaustion, but his step was steady. A collective sigh passed through the hall, half relief, half suspicion. Mrs. Bloxby's eyes glistened, though her posture remained perfectly composed. Agatha, ever blunt, whispered, "Well, thank God for that. I was beginning to wonder if I'd have to conduct the funeral myself." "Shh," Mrs. Bloxby murmured, though there was the faintest twitch of amusement at her lips. The coroner's tone softened as Alf took the stand. "Reverend Bloxby, would you please explain your recent absence?" He cleared his throat, voice low but firm. I left Carsely to pray for clarity. I had lost sight of my purpose and feared I might do harm through weakness. I thought solitude would help. Did you inform anyone of your departure? Only my wife. I asked her not to speak of it until I returned. I had no wish to become a matter of village discussion. A ripple of ironic laughter escaped the crowd. Even Agatha smiled grimly. And your connection to the late Mr. Pike? Alf's expression darkened. Harold came to me last month, distraught. He confessed to forging my name on parish cheques. He'd been siphoning money to pay off debts. He said he'd return it, but then he made a second confession. Which was? He claimed he and a woman, Miss Calder, were being blackmailed by someone who had letters purporting to be from me. He wanted me to take the blame, to protect her. Gasps fluttered through the room. Agatha leaned forward, intent. And were those letters genuine? The coroner asked. No, said Alf quietly. They were forgeries. Harold had written them himself, hoping to distract suspicion from his theft. He thought if people believed he was covering for me, I'd have no choice but to keep silent. Mrs. Mason, from the WI, hissed something to her neighbour that sounded suspiciously like a likely story. Agatha shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Did you confront him about this? I intended to, Alf said. But when I went to the church that evening, he was gone. I found his office ransacked. I meant to call the police, but I hesitated. I felt responsible, so I went away to pray. The coroner cleared his throat. So, you deny any romantic involvement with Miss Calder? I do, said Alf simply. I spoke to her once when she delivered religious goods to the parish. She was kind but troubled. I pitied her, nothing more. His quiet dignity silenced even Mrs. Mason. When he stepped down, Agatha caught his eye and gave a small nod. Alf inclined his head in return, an acknowledgement between two people who both, in their way, meddled for what they believed right. Bill Wong testified next, summarizing the evidence. The forged accounts, the letters, the discovery of Faith's burnt-out car on Mercester Heath. No definitive link has yet been established between her death and Harold Pike's poisoning, he said carefully. But we believe the motive in both cases was to conceal the fraud. Any suspects? Asked the coroner. Not at present, Bill replied. The investigation continues. Agatha noted the fatigue in his eyes. He looked older, worn down by the tangle of lies and half-truths. The rest of the proceedings blurred together. Statements, exhibits, the dull thrum of legal procedure. Yet beneath the routine, Agatha felt tension coiling, an unspoken recognition that something still didn't fit. When the inquest adjourned for lunch, Carsely descended on the Red Lion like pilgrims at a shrine. The pub buzzed with theories, each more ridiculous than the last. They'll clear the vicar now, said Doris Simpson, setting down her sherry with authority. But you mark my words, someone else will hang for it. You can't fake holy ink and get away with it. Do stop talking about hanging, said Agatha tartly. It's a coroner's inquest, not a Tudor fairground. She and Charles took a table by the window. Outside, the spring sunshine shone deceptively warm on the village green. So, he said lazily, the Reverend's absolved, the village gets its moral compass back, and you look faintly disappointed. I'm not disappointed, she said, lighting a cigarette. Just unconvinced. Harold's death feels tidy, too tidy, and I've never trusted tidy endings. Charles smiled. You prefer the messy sort where you're nearly killed. They're more satisfying, she said. Mrs. Bloxby joined them, serene as ever. You were right about Harold's forgery, Agatha, she said quietly. Alf confirmed it to me last night. But there's something else he didn't tell the court. Harold mentioned being frightened of a parishioner, someone who kept reminding him of the wages of sin. He thought she knew about the money. Agatha's brows shot up. Did he say who? No, said Mrs. Bloxby, but I can think of one or two ladies fond of moral correction. Her tone was mild, but her eyes flicked meaningfully toward the bar, where Mrs. Mason was holding court with the WI ladies. Agatha followed her gaze. Mrs. Mason, formidable in lilac polyester, was gesturing with her gloves, a heavy black pair that looked more suited to gardening than tea gossip. When she removed them to drink, Agatha noticed faint black smudges across the fingertips. Soot. Her mind flashed to Bill's report. Soot in the boot of Faith Calder's burnt car, found on Mercester Heath. She forced her tone casual. Mrs. Bloxby, "Have you noticed Mrs. Mason's gloves?" "Yes," said Mrs. Blocksby serenely. "They're quite dreadful." "No, I mean sooty. She's not exactly the coal-cellar type." "Perhaps she's been polishing her conscience," murmured Charles. Agatha smirked, but her mind was already racing. Bill joined them, weary but smiling faintly. "The coroner's verdict will be unlawful killing. We'll continue the investigation, but frankly, we're running out of leads." "You've still got soot," said Agatha. "What?" "In Faith Calder's boot. It wasn't from the fire, it was older. Found on the carpet and hinge, remember?" Bill frowned. "Yes, but we've no idea where it came from." Agatha's eyes drifted again to Mrs. Mason, who was now regaling her audience with a blow-by-blow account of the vicar's testimony. Every so often she dabbed her forehead with a handkerchief, leaving faint grey streaks on her temple. "Bill," Agatha said slowly, "what's the latest on the church boiler?" He looked puzzled. "Boiler? It broke down last month. Why?" "Because," said Agatha, leaning forward, "Harold Pike was the one who fixed it, and Mrs. Mason was the one who complained about it every week since Christmas. I remember because she lectured me about it at the WI. The house of God should never be cold, she said." "So?" "So," Agatha continued, excitement rising, "what if she confronted Harold about the money, thinking it was Alf's doing? He confesses, panics, tells her he'll put it right, but she's terrified it'll stain the parish. She poisons him to keep it quiet. Then Faith turns up, threatening to expose the forgery, and Mrs. Mason deals with her too, sets fire to the car, not realizing soot clings to rubber gloves." Charles raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution rests." Bill sighed. "You're basing this on soot and sermon quotes." "And instinct," said Agatha firmly. "Your instincts have nearly got you killed twice." "And yet here I am, thriving." Mrs. Blocksby laid a gentle hand on her arm. "Agatha, don't go charging at Mrs. Mason like a bull in a churchyard. Let Bill do his job." Agatha exhaled. "I'll behave, possibly." That afternoon, the inquest concluded quietly. Alf gave a closing statement of humility and hope, thanking the village for its prayers. The coroner ruled both deaths as unlawful killings, pending further inquiry. Outside, the press clustered like crows. Agatha slipped away down the lane, her thoughts buzzing. When she reached home, the first drops of rain began to fall. Hodge met her at the door, tail flicking with practised disdain. She poured herself a gin and stood at the window, watching as the drizzle blurred the village into watercolour greys. Mrs. Mason crossed the green, umbrella aloft, her gloves tucked neatly under one arm. For a moment, Agatha thought of calling Bill immediately, but she hesitated. Proof first, she told herself. Proof, not instinct. Hodge leapt onto the sill beside her, purring faintly. "You know," she said to him, "Mrs. Mason always said the devil hides in small details." She wasn't wrong. She just didn't realize she'd married one. The cat blinked, unimpressed by theology. Agatha smiled faintly, lighting a cigarette. "Still, I suppose we should thank her. Nothing livens up Carsely quite like mortal sin." Outside, the rain thickened into a steady curtain, the kind that promised trouble ahead. But inside, the glow from the lamp softened everything. The cigarette smoke, the clink of ice in glass, and Agatha's uneasy satisfaction. For now, at least, the village could sleep. Tomorrow, there would be more questions. And perhaps, finally, the truth. By the time the jumble sale arrived, Agatha had tried, briefly, to let Bill handle it. But Mrs. Mason's smugness and those sooty gloves finished her patience. The morning of the Carsely Women's Institute jumble sale dawned grey and clammy, as if even the weather felt guilty. By 9 o'clock, the village hall smelled of damp wool, old books, and moral superiority. Tables groaned beneath teetering stacks of chipped china and polyester cardigans, and Mrs. Mason stood in command, clipboard in hand, like a field marshal of virtue. Agatha Raisin paused at the doorway, surveying the scene with distaste. Crowds always made her irritable, especially self-righteous ones. She adjusted her scarf, squared her shoulders, and strode in. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin," said Mrs. Mason, her smile as tight as a hymn-book binding. "Do try not to knock anything over this year." "No promises," Agatha replied, handing over a carrier bag. "A few donations, hardly worn." Mrs. Mason peered into the bag. "Sequins, Mrs. Raisin?" she said with faint horror. "We do try to maintain a standard." "Yes," said Agatha, lighting a cigarette just outside the door. Lo, Charles Fraith appeared beside her, immaculate as always. "You look terrifying," he said approvingly. "Are we shopping or interrogating?" "Interrogating," Agatha said, "though I may buy a scarf if guilt doesn't distract me." He grinned. "Then I'll fetch a chair. You do your thing." Inside, Mrs. Mason was fussing over a display of teapots, lecturing Doris Simpson about proper presentation. The hall buzzed with chatter and the faint squeak of sensible shoes. Agatha took a slow breath, exhaled a plume of smoke, and marched toward her quarry. "Mrs. Mason," she said brightly, "we need a word." The churchwarden blinked, startled by Agatha's tone. "I'm rather busy, Mrs. Raisin. Perhaps later." "Now," said Agatha firmly. "It's about Faith Calder and soot." Mrs. Mason froze. Her gloved hands, black and smudged as ever, tightened on the teapot handle. "Soot," she repeated. "Yes," said Agatha, "the same sort found in the boot of Faith's burnt car. The same kind from the church boiler you were forever complaining about. The one Harold Pike fixed for you before he was poisoned." The surrounding murmur of conversation faded. Even Doris stopped pretending to fold sweaters. Mrs. Mason's lips trembled, her chin lifting in indignation. "Really, Mrs. Raisin, I don't know what you're implying." "Oh, you do," said Agatha, voice cool. "You found out Harold was stealing parish funds. You confronted him. He begged forgiveness, said he'd put it right, but you couldn't risk scandal. Better to spare the church, you thought. So you did what self-righteous people always do when cornered. You played God." "How dare you!" cried Mrs. Mason. "I only wanted—" "To protect appearances," Agatha interrupted. "You slipped poison into his tea and told yourself it was mercy. Then Faith Calder turned up, waving letters and threats, and you realized the fire of righteousness could burn twice." Charles, leaning casually against the doorframe, murmured, "She's good, isn't she?" Doris nodded faintly. Mrs. Mason's composure cracked. "She was going to ruin everything," she burst out. "The papers, the parish, Alf Bloxby's good name. It would have destroyed him." "So you destroyed her instead," Agatha said softly. The silence was thick enough to slice. Somewhere a kettle clicked off in the kitchen. Mrs. Mason sagged against the table, tears streaking through her powder. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It wasn't murder. It was duty. Harold had sinned. Faith was evil. I cleansed what needed cleansing." "Oh, do stop moralizing," Agatha snapped. "You killed 2 people and think you're cleaner for it. The devil must be rolling with laughter." Bill Wong arrived just then, summoned earlier by Agatha's strategic phone call. He took in the scene, the pale, weeping Mrs. Mason, Agatha standing triumphant, Charles looking faintly entertained. "Mrs. Mason," he said gently, "I think you'd better come with me." She looked up, eyes hollow. "I prayed for guidance," she murmured, "and God sent me none." "He sent you me instead," said Agatha. "Bad luck, really." As Bill led her out, the hall buzzed anew, voices rising in a storm of gossip. Agatha ignored them, lighting another cigarette with trembling hands. Charles handed her a chair. "You enjoyed that," he said. "Not the crying part," she admitted, "but the confession was satisfying." He smiled faintly. "You're wasted on village life, Aggie." "Village life," she said dryly, "never wastes anything. It recycles sin." When the police car had gone, Mrs. Bloxby approached quietly. Her calm presence made Agatha feel both soothed and scolded. "You were right about Mrs. Mason," said the vicar's wife softly. "I should have seen it. She was obsessed with propriety, always first to judge, last to forgive." "She'd have made an excellent bishop," said Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby gave a small, sad smile. "Alf wanted to thank you. He says he owes you a great deal." "He owes me nothing," said Agatha. "I meddled because I was bored." "You meddled because you care," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. "Nonsense, I did it for the thrill." "Then you have a kind heart for someone so selfish," said Mrs. Bloxby, and drifted away before Agatha could retort. By afternoon, the jumble sale was back in motion, as if morality could be tidied into boxes. Agatha wandered among the tables, her triumph cooling into melancholy. People smiled, thanked her for helping the vicarage, and resumed gossiping. Charles reappeared with a cup of weak tea. "Bill's taken her in," he said. "Apparently she'd written everything down, confession, motives, the works. Claimed she was saving the parish from disgrace." Agatha sipped her tea, grimacing. Murder always tastes of tea in this village, weak and tepid. "And you?" he asked. "Do you feel better now it's over?" She glanced at him. "I never feel better, Charles. Just older." He smiled. "Still, you've restored order." "Order, yes," she said. "But peace, that's another story." They walked out together into the thin drizzle. The church bells tolled the hour, soft, forgiving, annoyingly poetic. "You know," said Agatha, "Alf Bloxby's confession wasn't about sin at all. He told me this morning he'd been praying because he'd lost faith in his ability to see good in people. Turns out he wasn't wrong." "You're surprisingly philosophical for someone with lipstick on her teeth," said Charles. She dabbed her mouth crossly. "Philosophy is just despair with better posture." He laughed. "Come on, I'll buy you dinner before you depress the entire Cotswolds." Back at her cottage later, Agatha fed Hodge, who mewed imperiously before retreating to his usual chair. The village was quiet again, rain pattering gently against the windows. She poured herself a gin, switched on the lamp, and watched the light pool over the carpet. On the table lay the morning's newspaper, its headline already outdated. "Vicar missing, affair rumours deepen." Tomorrow's edition would carry another kind of story. Churchwarden arrested for double murder. Agatha shook her head. "All that righteousness," she murmured, "and not a shred of decency in sight." She picked up the phone and dialed Bill's number. "Raisin," he said tiredly. "She's confessed to everything. Poison in the sugar bowl, fire accelerant in Faith's boot, and a letter she meant to send to the bishop explaining it all as a necessary act. We'll never get through her trial without half the press turning it into a sermon." "You'll manage," said Agatha. "Just tell them I'm giving a talk on hypocrisy. Limited seating, of course." Bill chuckled. "I might attend that one myself." "Don't bother," she said. "You're too nice to enjoy it." After she hung up, she stood for a long moment by the window, cigarette glowing in the dimness. The drizzle blurred the outlines of the church steeple, the cottages, the green. It looked peaceful again, deceptively so. She thought of Mrs. Mason's trembling hands, Alf's weary eyes, Mrs. Bloxby's quiet faith, and herself, proud, nosy, unrepentant. "That's Christianity for you," she muttered, half amused, half weary. Hodge yawned, stretching luxuriously before curling into sleep. Agatha sat down beside him, poured another gin, and allowed herself a small, crooked smile. For all her cynicism, there was comfort in order restored, even if it was shabby and imperfect, rather like Carsely itself. She took a drag from her cigarette, watching the smoke twist upward. Somewhere beyond the rain, a fox barked, and the village settled back into uneasy grace. "Peace on earth," she said dryly. "For now." The clock ticked, the cat purred, and Agatha, detective and sinner both, leaned back with a sigh that was almost contentment. Carsely, ever the expert in selective memory, had returned to its usual rhythm within a fortnight. The scandal that had shaken the parish now lived only in whispered fragments over teacups, safely reduced to moral anecdote. The spring rain had settled into a mild drizzle, less repentance, more routine, and the village green looked freshly scrubbed, as though even nature wanted to tidy up the mess. Agatha Raisin, however, was finding peace intolerably dull. She stood at her cottage window, glaring at the neatly clipped hedges, as if they were personally responsible for the lull. Hodge, sprawled on the windowsill, blinked at her with the superior calm of a creature who understood that gossip, unlike cats, should never be chased. It always came back on its own. The church bells began to ring. Sunday again. Agatha groaned. Still she went, partly for appearances, partly for the smug pleasure of watching Carsely pretend nothing had happened. The vicarage pews were packed. Even Doris Simpson wore a new hat, though it looked suspiciously like one of the jumble sales rejects. Reverend Alf Bloxby's sermon was gentle, measured, and full of phrases like "forgive as you wish to be forgiven." Agatha listened with half an ear and a whole cigarette craving. When he spoke of moral humility, she caught Mrs. Mason's empty seat in the front row and wondered whether the sermon was aimed at her or herself. After the service, Mrs. Bloxby intercepted her in the churchyard, carrying a tin of shortbread, and that infuriatingly kind expression that made Agatha feel both cherished and chastised. "You did a good thing, Agatha," said Mrs. Bloxby softly, "even if you did it in your own way." "Nonsense," Agatha replied briskly. "I meddled, everyone cried, and now you've got another sermon to polish. Hardly saintly work." Mrs. Blocksby smiled that small, serene smile that meant behave, Agatha. You force truth into the open. That's not nothing. It's trouble, said Agatha, and trouble always finds me. Then perhaps, said the vicar's wife, pressing the tin into her hands, you're one of God's more useful nuisances. Agatha snorted. I'll drink to that. By Tuesday, Roy Silver had already transformed the whole saga into a glossy feature for country life and leisure. The article, entitled Cotswold Confession, One Woman's Moral Awakening Among the Marmalade Makers, was mortifying. He'd rung her that morning, his voice crackling with excitement down the line. Darling, it's a masterpiece. All misty lanes, moral courage, and middle-aged mystery. You're practically a national institution. I'll have you know I was a national institution before you were born, Agatha snapped. And if you mention my name, I'll sue. Of course not, he said sweetly. You're just a formidable lady of independent means with a suspicious mind and excellent highlights. You're insufferable, Roy. Yes, but I photograph beautifully. Kiss, kiss. She'd hung up, muttering, though a reluctant smile had tugged at her mouth. Later that week, Charles Fraith drove her to lunch in Moreton-in-Marsh, the top down on his vintage convertible despite the uncertain clouds. Agatha, wrapped in a scarf and pretending not to enjoy herself, accused him of reckless optimism. You should sin more often, Aggie, he said as they parked outside a small bistro. It suits your complexion, gives you that glow of moral superiority. She laughed, half annoyed, half pleased. I don't sin, Charles, I investigate, entirely different profession. Ah, he said, ordering wine, but both require talent for self-justification. They lingered over lunch, talking of nothing, fashion, scandal, the absurdity of people who thought forgiveness was tidy. Charles flirted, Agatha pretended to ignore him, and both felt that peculiar comfort that comes from being safely misunderstood. When he dropped her home, he kissed her cheek lightly. Try not to start another murder before summer, he said. I make no promises, she replied. Back inside her cottage, the familiar quiet settled around her. The faint ticking of the clock, the purr of Hodge, the smell of rain on stone. It was all as it had been, and yet not quite. She poured herself a gin, the good kind, and sat by the fire with her notebook. On the first page she'd written, Observation, moral vanity more lethal than greed. Underneath she added, Note, never trust anyone who polishes their virtue more than their shoes. Outside, the drizzle thickened into proper rain. Carsely would gossip itself clean by next week, she knew, and by then some new drama would be brewing, perhaps a fate scandal, or an illicit romance between the organist and the head of the flower committee. She smiled faintly. The world never truly stayed quiet for long. Hodge stretched, his tail flicking in drowsy agreement. We've earned our rest, haven't we, she said, until the next idiot sins publicly. The cat yawned. Agatha leaned back, lit a cigarette, and watched the smoke coil upward, lazy and deliberate. Through the open window came the faint, familiar peal of church bells drifting across the wet air, soft, forgiving, a little smug. She raised her glass in a small, ironic toast. To peace, she murmured, however temporary. Hodge blinked, unimpressed, then resumed his nap. Agatha exhaled a long plume of smoke, amused despite herself. She had no illusions about goodness, least of all her own, but there was comfort in the knowledge that life, like sin, always came back around. Outside, Carsely drowsed beneath its veil of rain, cottages glowing, hedgerows dripping, tranquillity restored with the quiet arrogance of an English village certain it would endure anything, even truth. Agatha scribbled one final note in her book. Forgiveness overrated, gin underrated. Then she closed it, smiled, and listened to the rain tapping at the glass. Another mystery gone, another sermon survived, another gin deserved. And somewhere between the purring cat, the curling smoke, and the faint sound of distant psalms, Agatha Raisin, vain, meddling, marvellously alive, felt for once almost content.